certified incident briefings, real video evidence, strict accountability. You are viewing Bodycam incident reports.
Mind telling me what you're doing in here?
Waiting for my vehicle.
No, you're loitering. You don't look like a customer. Show ID.
Unless you can name a crime, I'm not required to identify. Leave me alone.
Stand up. Hands on the wall. Now.
In the pristine glass-walled waiting lounge of the city's premier luxury automotive performance center, a police officer stood over a seated black man, his hand hovering near his taser, driven by an instinct that he called police intuition, but that the data would later identify as systemic bias. What was intended to be a routine moment of intimidation, a way to clear out someone who didn't look the part, would spiral into a defining legal battle for the city of Chicago. It would expose the rot inside a decorated precinct, cost the taxpayers nearly $18 million, and end the career of a man who thought a badge gave him the right to decide who belonged. Before we dive into the details of this explosive encounter, I need you to do something for me. Scroll down and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you believe that justice should be blind, hit that subscribe button right now. This story is a masterclass in why you never judge a book by its cover, and you are going to want to see the look on this officer's face when the truth comes out. Officer Marcus Graves, 42 years old, was a veteran of the force. He was the kind of cop who bragged about his stats in the locker room. He worked the Gold Coast district, an area of high-end retail historic brownstones and immense wealth. To his superiors, Graves was a proactive enforcer. He kept the streets clean. But a closer look at his record, a look that had been meticulously avoided by internal affairs for years, painted a darker picture. In the 24 months leading up to this incident, Officer Graves had logged 312 field interviews, stops where a citizen is questioned but not necessarily arrested. Of those 312 stops, 280 were black men. Of those 280 men, 265 were stopped in areas zoned for luxury retail or high-income housing. And the most damning statistic of all, less than 2% of those stops resulted in a citation for an actual crime. Graves wasn't catching criminals. He was patrolling social boundaries. He viewed himself as a gatekeeper protecting the affluent district from outsiders. The complaints were there buried in the digital archives of the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. Officer was rude. Officer refused to explain the stop. Officer made assumptions about my income. But Graves had a talent for writing reports that justified his actions. He used key phrases like furtive movements, pre-assault indicators, and suspicious behavior consistent with retail theft. These magic words acted as a shield, turning harassment into proactive policing. That shield held strong until a rainy Tuesday afternoon in November, inside the climate-controlled luxury of Apex Automotive. The waiting lounge at Apex was designed to feel less like a garage and more like a five-star hotel lobby. Espresso machines, hummed leather armchairs, faced floor-to-ceiling windows, and the smell was not of grease and oil, but of expensive cologne and fresh leather. It was a sanctuary for the city's elite, a place where privacy was paramount. Sitting in one of the wingback chairs was Dr. Elias Thorne. At 64 years old, Thorne was a man of quiet, commanding presence. He wore a charcoal turtleneck and tailored wool trousers, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he marked up a set of architectural blueprints spread across his lap. To the uneducated eye, he was just an older man waiting for a car. But Elias Thorne was not just a customer. He was a legend. A dual-degree holder in structural engineering and urban planning from MIT, Thorne was the principal architect behind the city's recent skyline revitalization. He had designed the very precinct station Officer Graves reported to every morning. He was currently serving as the chair of the city's Ethics and Infrastructure Board, a civilian oversight body with immense power over municipal contracts and, crucially, city zoning laws. He was waiting for his vintage 1970 Mercedes-Benz 280 SE, a car he had restored with his own hands, to be brought around after a specialist alignment. Thorne was tired. He had spent the morning in contentious budget meetings. He just wanted to review his schematics, drink his coffee, and go home to his wife. He didn't notice Officer Graves enter the dealership. He was too focused on the structural load calculations for a new library annex. Graves had walked in to use the facilities, but his eyes were always scanning. He saw the polished floors, the six-figure cars, the mostly white clientele sipping cappuccinos. And then he saw Thorne. In Graves' mind, the equation didn't balance. Thorne wasn't on a phone. He wasn't watching the TV. He was studying large pieces of paper blueprints maps Graves' cynicism kicked in. He's mapping the layout, Graves thought. He's scouting the exits, checking the camera angles. He's not a customer. He's intel for a theft ring. It was a leap of logic so vast it defied gravity, but for Graves it was enough. He adjusted his belt, hitched up his pants, and began the slow, deliberate walk across the showroom floor. The heavy tread of his boots on the marble tile announced his approach. "Excuse me?" Thorne didn't look up immediately. He finished a calculation, capped his pen, and then raised his eyes. "Yes. You mind telling me what you're doing here?" Graves asked, his voice carrying just enough volume to make the receptionist look up. "I am waiting," Thorne said simply, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. "Waiting for what?" "My vehicle." Graves smirked. It was a look of condescension he had perfected over 2 decades. "Right. Your vehicle. You know we've had a lot of issues lately with people loitering in these high-end businesses, using the free Wi-Fi, drinking the free coffee, making the paying customers uncomfortable." Thorne took off his glasses and folded them slowly. "I see. And you've determined that I am making people uncomfortable. Or is it that I am making you uncomfortable, officer?" "Don't get smart with me," Graves snapped, stepping into Thorne's personal space. "I asked a simple question. Which car is yours?" "The one being serviced," Thorne replied, refusing to be baited. "Now, if you don't mind, I have work to review." "I do mind," Graves said. "Because I don't think you have a car here. I think you're scouting. I think you're looking for keys to swipe, so I'm going to need to see some ID, driver's license, now." This was the pivot point. The moment where the encounter shifted from a nuisance to a civil rights violation. Thorne knew the law better than Graves did. He knew that in this state, unless he was operating a vehicle or there was reasonable suspicion of a crime, he was not required to identify himself. "Officer," Thorne said, keeping his hands visible on his lap, "I am seated in a private business. I am not operating a motor vehicle. Unless you can articulate a specific crime you suspect me of committing, I am not required to provide identification. I am a paying customer, and I would like to be left alone." "You want a crime?" Graves' face reddened. "How about trespassing? The manager didn't invite you here." "Actually, the service agreement I signed constitutes an invitation," Thorne countered calmly. "Disorderly conduct," Graves shot back. "You're raising your voice. You're causing a scene." The irony was palpable. The lounge was silent except for Graves' aggressive barking. A woman in a business suit 2 seats away lowered her magazine. A young man with a laptop took out his phone and started recording. The scene was entirely of Graves' making. "I am speaking at a conversational volume," Thorne said. "You are the one shouting." "Stand up," Graves ordered. His hand moved to the radio on his shoulder. "Unit 4 Alpha to dispatch. I've got an uncooperative subject at Apex Automotive, possible 1031 in progress, refusing to identify. Send a backup unit." A 10-31 was the code for a crime in progress. Graves was escalating, calling in a cavalry for a man sitting in a chair. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice hardening slightly, "I'm going to give you one chance to de-escalate this. You are making a mistake, a very expensive mistake." "Is that a threat?" Graves unclipped the retention strap on his holster. He didn't draw the weapon, but the threat was clear. "Did you just threaten an officer?" "It is a statement of fact," Thorne said. "I am asking you to check your assumptions before you proceed." "Stand up, turn around, hands on the wall," Graves barked, losing control of his temper. Thorne stood slowly. He was tall, 6'2", standing eye to eye with Graves. He didn't turn around. He simply stood his ground, radiating a dignity that seemed to infuriate Graves even more. "I will not turn around. I am not under arrest." Graves lunged. He grabbed Thorne's arm, twisting it behind his back with excessive force. The blueprints slid off Thorne's lap, scattering across the polished floor. "You are now," Graves shouted. "Resisting, stop resisting." Thorne didn't resist. He allowed his arm to be twisted, wincing slightly at the pain in his shoulder, but he didn't pull away. He knew the cameras were rolling. He knew the witnesses were watching. "I am compliant," Thorne stated clearly for the benefit of the recording phones. "I am not resisting. You are hurting my shoulder." "Shut up." Graves shoved Thorne toward the glass wall, pinning him against it. He pulled out his handcuffs. The metallic click-click echoed through the silent showroom. The dealership manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, came running from the back offices, alerted by the receptionist. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw what was happening. "Whoa! Officer, stop!" Henderson yelled, waving his hands. "What are you doing?" "Back off," Graves yelled over his shoulder. "This subject is under arrest for trespassing and resisting. He refused to leave." "Trespassing?" Henderson looked horrified. "That's Dr. Thorne. He's one of our VIP clients. He's been coming here for 20 years. Oh. Graves froze. The handcuffs were on one of Thorne's wrists, dangling loose on the other. "VIP client?" Graves repeated, the adrenaline still pumping his brain, struggling to process the information. "He's waiting for his 280 SE," Henderson stammered, rushing forward but keeping a safe distance from the aggressive officer. "He has an appointment. I personally greeted him 20 minutes ago." Graves looked at Thorne. Thorne looked back, his expression unreadable, his eyes cold and sharp. "Uncuff him," Henderson demanded. "Right now." Graves hesitated. In his mind, he was already too deep. To back down now would be to admit he was wrong, and Marcus Graves didn't admit he was wrong. He needed to salvage the authority of the badge. "He refused to identify," Graves said, his voice less certain but still defiant. "He failed to comply with a lawful order. It doesn't matter who he is. You don't say no to police." "The order was not lawful," Thorne said, his voice calm despite being pinned against the wall. "Because the premise of your stop, that I was a criminal, was based entirely on your prejudice." Sirens wailed outside. The backup Graves had requested arrived. 2 more officers burst into the showroom, hands on their weapons, expecting a brawl. What they found was their colleague pinning a well-dressed 64-year-old man against a window while the dealership manager screamed at him. Sergeant Miller, the shift supervisor, was among the new arrivals. He took one look at the scene, the scattered blueprints, the recording witnesses, the furious manager, and knew immediately that this was a disaster. "Graves, step back," Miller ordered. "Sarge, he was." "I said step back." Miller physically inserted himself between Graves and Thorne. He turned to Thorne. "Sir, are you armed?" "I'm armed only with my intellect and my constitutional rights," Thorne said dryly, "and currently a half-applied set of handcuffs." Miller quickly unlocked the cuff and removed it. "Sir, I apologize. Let's take a breath." Thorne rubbed his wrist. He adjusted his turtleneck. He bent down, picked up his glasses, and inspected them for damage. Then he reached into his back pocket. Graves flinched his hand, twitching toward his gun again. "He's reaching." Thorne ignored him. He pulled out a slim leather wallet. He opened it and extracted 2 cards. He handed them to Sergeant Miller. "My driver's license," Thorne said, "and my city credentials." Miller looked at the license. Then he looked at the second card. It was a heavy gold-embossed ID card issued by the city mayor's office. Elias Thorne, Chairman, Infrastructure and Ethics Oversight Board. Miller's face went pale. He looked at Graves, who was still breathing heavy, trying to look tough. "Graves," Miller said quietly. "Do you know who this is?" "Some guy with a nice car," Graves muttered. "This is the chairman of the Oversight Board," Miller hissed. "He literally oversees the budget for the new precinct you're trying to transfer to. He writes the ethics guidelines we are supposed to follow." Graves stared at the card. The silence in the room was absolute. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The thug he had pinned against the glass was one of the most powerful unelected officials in the city. "Am I free to go, Sergeant?" Thorne asked, his voice cutting through the tension. "Or does Officer Graves need to verify my income tax returns as well?" "You are free to go, Mr. Chairman," Miller said, handing back the IDs with a trembling hand. "Again, I am so sorry. This was a misunderstanding." "Oh, no," Thorne said, turning his gaze to Graves. "A misunderstanding is when you mishear a sentence. This was a targeted assault based on racial profiling, and it is all on video." Thorne pointed to the young man with the laptop who was still recording. He pointed to the security cameras in the corners of the ceiling. "I will be taking my car now," Thorne said. "Mr. Henderson, is it ready?" "Yes, Dr. Thorne, immediately," the manager squeaked. Thorne gathered his blueprints. He didn't look at Graves again. He didn't need to. He walked out to the service bay, got into his pristine, gleaming vintage Mercedes, and drove out into the rain. Graves stood in the showroom, the eyes of every customer and employee burning into him. He knew deep down that his career was over, but he didn't know yet just how bad it was going to get. The video hit the internet 3 hours later. The young man with the laptop had uploaded it with the caption, "Cop attacks city architect for loitering at luxury dealership." By the evening news, it had 2 million views. By the next morning, it was the lead story on CNN. The contrast was too perfect, too devastating. The visuals of a distinguished elderly black man surrounded by the trappings of success. Blueprints, luxury cars, a calm demeanor being manhandled by a frantic, aggressive officer. The audio was crystal clear. "I think you're scouting. You don't look like a customer." Dr. Thorne didn't go to the media. He went to court. 5 days after the incident, Thorne filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city, the police department, and Officer Marcus Graves personally. He hired the toughest civil rights firm in Chicago, a team known for tearing police unions apart. The lawsuit alleged Fourth Amendment violations, unlawful seizure. 14th Amendment violations, equal protection/racial profiling, assault, battery, and false imprisonment. But Thorne's lawsuit went further. He sued for pattern and practice. He wasn't just claiming Graves made a mistake. He was claiming Graves was a habitual predator protected by a corrupt system. The discovery phase of the trial was a bloodbath for the department. Thorne's lawyers demanded Graves's entire history. They demanded the GPS logs of his patrol car. They demanded his text messages. The city tried to settle immediately. They offered $2 million to make it go away. Thorne rejected it. "It's not about the price," Thorne told his legal team. "I want the data. I want the files open." The judge, recognizing the gravity of the case and the undeniable video evidence, granted the discovery requests. The data revealed the monster. The statistics regarding Graves's stops. The 280 black men stopped in luxury zones became public record. But it was the text messages that sealed his fate. On a group chat with 3 other officers just 2 days before the incident, Graves had written, "Gonna sweep the dealership lots this week. Too many shadows creeping around looking at rides they can't afford. Time to take out the trash." The courtroom gasped when that text was read aloud. It was the smoking gun of intent. It proved that the stop wasn't about intuition. It was about a premeditated desire to remove black people from spaces Graves felt they didn't belong. Officer Graves took the stand in his own defense. It was a disaster. Under cross-examination, he tried to pivot to his training. "I was trained to look for anomalies," Graves insisted, sweating under the harsh lights. "Something that doesn't fit the baseline." "And in your mind," Thorne's attorney asked, pacing in front of the jury, "a black man reading blueprints in a luxury dealership is an anomaly. Is it impossible for you to conceive of a black man who can afford a Mercedes?" "No, I mean, it's just the area," Graves stammered. "The area," the attorney pressed. "The area Dr. Thorne helped design. The area where he owns a penthouse. You were policing an area he built, Officer Graves. You were the anomaly, not him." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They returned a verdict in favor of Dr. Elias Thorne on all counts. They awarded $5 million in compensatory damages for the humiliation and physical pain. But then came the punitive damages the money meant to punish the city and force change. The jury awarded an additional $12.5 million. The total judgment, $17.5 million. It was the largest single-victim police misconduct payout in the city's history. But as with Judge Carter in Atlanta, the money was secondary to the structural earthquake that followed. The Thorne Decree became the new standard for the department. Termination Officer Graves was fired and stripped of his pension. The state revoked his peace officer certification permanently. He would never carry a badge again. Private property protocol officers were strictly forbidden from initiating investigatory stops inside private businesses unless summoned by the owner or witnessing a violent felony. Loitering was removed as a primary reason for engagement. Data transparency. The department was forced to publish demographic data on all field interviews every month. If an officer's ratio of stops deviated significantly from the population demographics, an automatic internal affairs trigger was pulled. Bystander rights. A new department policy explicitly stated that citizens recording police actions were not to be interfered with, and any attempt to block a camera would result in immediate suspension. 6 months after the verdict, Dr. Elias Thorne returned to Apex Automotive. The dealership had undergone some changes, too. They had fired the receptionist who let Graves walk past without checking him in. They had installed a plaque in the waiting lounge. Thorne walked in, the bell on the door chiming softly. The new manager, a young woman named Sarah, rushed out to greet him. "Dr. Thorne, good to see you. The 280 SE is ready for its spring tune-up." "It is," Thorne smiled. "Though the suspension feels a little stiff." He sat in the same wingback chair. He spread out a new set of blueprints, this time for a youth community center in the South Side, a project funded entirely by a portion of his settlement money. He looked around the lounge. There was a young black couple looking at a terrifyingly expensive sports car in the showroom. A police officer walked in the front door, a patrolman on his beat. Thorne tensed instinctively. The trauma was still there. The memory of the handcuffs, the twist of his arm, the feeling of helplessness. The officer walked up to the reception desk. "Afternoon. Just doing a perimeter check. Everything good here?" "Everything is great, officer," Sarah said. The officer looked into the lounge. He made eye contact with Thorne. There was no swagger, no suspicion. The officer nodded respectfully. "Dr. Thorne, good to see you, sir." "Officer," Thorne nodded back. The cop turned and left. No questions. No ID check. No assumptions. Thorne took a sip of his coffee. He looked at the plaque on the wall near the espresso machine. It read, "In honor of Dr. Elias Thorne, who reminded us that dignity is not a privilege to be earned, but a right to be respected." It was a nice gesture. But Thorne knew the truth. The plaque didn't change the world. The lawsuit didn't fix racism. Officer Graves was gone, but the mindset that created him was still out there, hiding in precinct locker rooms and behind the wheels of patrol cars. But they had sent a message. They had made it expensive to be a bigot. They had proven that the blue wall could be breached if you had enough courage, enough evidence, and the will to fight. Thorne went back to his blueprints. He was building a center where kids would learn engineering, coding, and law. He was building a future where hopefully they wouldn't need to carry their resumes in their back pockets just to survive a trip to the mechanic. He watched the rain fall against the glass he had been pinned against. He adjusted his cuff, covering the faint scar on his wrist where the metal had bitten into his skin. Justice is a heavy burden. It requires constant maintenance like an old car. You have to listen for the rattles. You have to check the alignment. And sometimes you have to tear the whole engine apart and rebuild it to make sure it runs right. Dr. Thorne was an architect. He knew how to build things to last. And he had just laid the foundation for a better city. If you made it to the end of this story, you know that this wasn't just about a car. It was about the assumption of guilt that hangs over so many people every single day. It was about the arrogance of power. If you believe that we need to keep holding these systems accountable, leave a comment saying, "Accountability matters." Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to like and subscribe. We're going to keep telling these stories until we don't have to anymore. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and know your rights.
Investigation officially closed. For additional unedited footage, remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for trusting Bodycam Incident Reports.